Hi everyone, welcome back to Winging It. We're in week 2 of our February project for our 2024 Stitch Along, and if you're new here and have no idea what we're doing, I will link a playlist at the top of the screen. Included in that playlist is an introductory video where I explain what we're going to be doing in a bit more detail, but just to catch you up. Each month we're going to create a piece over the Sundays in the month, and we created a more sort of pictorial scene in January of a January landscape wherever you are in the world, and this month we are working on the theme of fragments. So I've taken a February colour scheme. I explained in last week's video how I got this colour scheme. This was from a picture of a woodland carpeted in snowdrops, and so we've got some of those muddy browns and the cooler shell grey shades and these sort of dark earthy greens that show sort of new growth coming through the soil. And I have been on a couple of walks recently, and I have to say this couldn't be a more perfect colour scheme for this time of year in Lincolnshire. This is exactly what I see wherever I go. So I stitched quite a lot of this after the video had finished last time, so you can see I have done quite a lot of additional stitching over my weaving. So I have got some ideas for what we're going to do with the rest of the panel. So we created this quite busy slow stitch section here, and we've left quite a lot of space over this beigey wool fabric here, and I wanted to put some stitching in, and I thought let's not fight it, let's go with the idea of snowdrop. So I've been looking around for some ideas, and I've just sketched out a very simple snowdrop picture. I'm going to leave it on the screen so that you can take a screenshot or pause it if you want to, and you can make use of that little design that I've sketched out. It's loosely based on some clip art images that I found. Very simple. Maybe I should show you how to draw one actually. Let's just do that. So I've got my little post-it pad here. So if I start with the bud, because that's really simple. So snowdrops obviously have a drooping stalk, so all I've done is do a line with a little droop at the top like that, and then you need these sort of cups. I don't know the biological terms for these, but this sort of cup bit at the top that holds the flower, and that's just like an arch shape with a bottom on it, and I try not to do too many pointed edges. So we just do a little letter N and then put a line across the bottom, and then we're just going to make an elongated U shape, I suppose, like that. Kind of pointed at the bottom but not quite, and then we will shade it, so you want to give some sense that this is going to open up, so I'll just put a couple of little lines in there. So if we do a partially opened one next, I'm not going to, well, maybe I should kind of copy what I've drawn here, and then you can maybe have a go yourself. So I've done a stem at a different angle, do my little cup again, and then I want to do a sort of pointed oval shape that comes from the outside of that cup down and then back up to the centre of the cup, and then I'm going to do the same on the other side. So I want it pointed and then I come back up, and then we're just going to put a third shape in the middle, so it's kind of more like a V. When they open up they're a bit more pointed. So that's the partially open one, and then we've got a fully open one. So I took a stem up here like that, so kind of halfway between these two, and I'm going to put my cup on the top again, and this time we want to curve them a little bit, so more like a banana shape. I suppose that's a bit narrow, but it doesn't matter. And then I'm going to put another banana shape out here like that, and then we want a kind of upturned mug shape, I suppose, or upturned wine glass shape, and we're going to put a little curve in the bottom there, so like a flattened out W, I suppose, like that. And then we're going to put a little curvy, almost like a wave shape there, and this bit we're going to stitch green like that. And then you want another petal, and I find just in terms of composition, if you put it right in the middle it looks a bit weird, so I like to offset it a little bit, like it's coming off at a different angle. So you can put it down the middle, but I think it looks strange, and then you've got to worry about shading and things like that. So there's our open snowdrop shape, and you can tinker about with these if you want to, like that. And then for the leaves are completely artificial, but I'm just going to put two swirly lines going that way, and then two swirly lines going that way, and that just kind of gives a little bit of interest at the bottom of the design. So that's how I've created my snowdrop design. Really simple shapes. How to draw a snowdrop 101, and I've got a piece of natural linen that kind of matches in with my colour scheme. It's a sort of cool beige colour, just natural undyed linen, and I've transferred my snowdrop design onto that and just popped it in a hoop. So I thought we could just have a go at some kind of silk shading, that kind of thing, and see how we get on. So I'm going to start with some white embroidery floss. I'm using Anchor. I do have a couple of DMC. This one's a DMC, so 319 is a sort of dark green, 169 is a cool grey, and then I've got Anchor 001, which is my white, Anchor 258, which is a mid green, and then I've got Anchor 255, which is a light green. I'm only going to use a single strand. You can use two. I'm going to use one strand because the last time I did anything like this and did two strands, I was inundated with comments about how it's much better if you use one strand. So don't come for me. This is just a suggestion, and actually sometimes using a single strand is a little bit overwhelming if you've never done this before. Using one strand is a little bit overwhelming, and you can get quite a good result with two strands. It's absolutely fine. It's just a little bit less fine, it's a little bit chunkier, but actually I quite like the look of that, so it's not a problem to me at all. So I've got a single strand, I've knotted it, purists will tell me off for that as well. I think this is all about just enjoying the process, so I'm not trying to do it as perfectly as it's possible to do it. We're just going to have a bit of a go. And just as a disclaimer, I do not in any way claim to be an expert in silk shading. I haven't done it a lot, and I am a bit of a have a go hero. I'm like that with everything. I have no training at all. I've just stitched for a good portion of my life, and I am a bit of a jack of all trades, so I like to have a go at lots of different things and just play and experiment and try not to put too much pressure on myself. So even though I'm a bit of a neat freak, I think let's just all enjoy it. There are some superb embroidery channels. If you haven't come across Sarah Humphrey embroidery, I will link her down below. She is an expert embroiderer, and she has got the most encyclopedic knowledge of embroidery. she's a great person to learn from. I'm just having a play, so please bear with me. I'm sure many of you out there can do this much better than me, but we're just playing. Right, so I'm just going to come up at the top of my snowdrop petal. Let's start over here, and what we want to do is kind of stitch in a way that follows the shape, and we're going to go for a bit of a satin stitch, but we're going to do stitches of different lengths, so we don't want all our stitches to be the same length, because this is how silk shading works. We're going to sometimes call long and short stitch. I think it's a lot less popular to call it that these days. So what we want is to create a bit of a jagged line across the bottom of our row of stitches. So it's not helpful that I've started in white on this paler background, but it will become more obvious as time goes on. I'll try and play with the contrast when I'm editing this to make it a bit clearer. So we want to sit our stitches close together, but we don't want them all to end in a harsh line. And where you've got a bit of a curve, you can put another little stitch in, and it kind of pushes one stitch over. So here it's pushed this long stitch over a little bit, and it's also made that appear to be curving round. So now I'm going to do my next row. So I've gone all the way across the top there. Hope you can see that. Let me see if I can sharpen that up a bit. There we go. So I've gone all across the top of my petal, and now I want to come along again and do the next layer, and I want to tuck my next layer of stitches in between the stitches that I've just made. And again, oh crikey, I've just gone back up through the same hole. This is the problem with this natural linen, because the weave is quite wide, so it's easy to accidentally come back out of the hole that you just went in and undo your stitch. So I'm going to tuck my next layer of stitches in amongst the layer that I just made. And I'm going to try not to panic because already I'm thinking that it doesn't look very good. But we're just going to trust the process, because I've done this enough times to know that it all comes right in the end, and we're just having a therapeutic, meditative Sunday afternoon stitch, and we're just going to enjoy the rhythmic pattern of putting a needle through fabric. So I hope you've all had a good week. I know it's not quite a week since the last video went live, but I've been trying to catch up a little bit, so that's why we've got a bit of a bonus video. It's not really a bonus, it's just to make up for the couple of weeks that I didn't post. So thank you all so much for your support and your really lovely comments. It did make me feel not quite so alone during one of the worst times of my life. So thank you so much. I've been really blown away. I'm not going to talk about what happened. You can go and read the post, but if you've already read it, you'll know. But and I'm not going to mention this very much, but I couldn't not acknowledge how fabulously kind you all were, how hugely supportive you've been, and it blows my mind really that putting a few sewing videos out on the internet and not really expecting anything has turned into one of the most delightful communities of amazing human beings I could ever have hoped to be a part of. And I just wanted to let you all know that I am okay, and I'm taking each day as it comes. But I'm so glad that you're all there and that you've got my back and that you take the time to send a little message to somebody that you don't really know just because you care. So thank you so much. Yeah, I can't tell you how grateful I am. So we're all okay, my family's fine, and we're just muddling through and trying to just love each other and support each other as best as we can. And going out for walks has been really helpful these last few weeks. So I've seen more snowdrops this year than I think I have in all of the last 10 years put together. And they are a flower, like I said in last week's video, they are a flower that is really hopeful for me. It's a sign that better things are on their way, and if, like me, you are not a fan of the winter, I find February particularly bleak, almost worse than January, really, because at least with January you've got that feeling that new beginnings are coming, and everybody starts each new year with gusto, don't they, with all our New Year's resolutions and our plans for what this year's going to hold and whatever. And then by February it's all feeling a bit tired and we're sick of the grey and we're sick of the rain. I think it's rained every day but 3 since the beginning of February in Lincolnshire, so our flooded fields are not getting any less flooded. It's bad news. So our poor farmers, I don't know what is going to happen this year, but I do find that, in the words of Jeff Goldblum from Jurassic Park, life will find a way. So there will be a solution. Nature will fix itself with our help, and it'll all be okay. I think we have to hold on to the fact that it will probably be all okay. We just do our part, and it'll all come right in the end. So our farmers will find a solution, I'm sure. But yeah, it's been extremely wet and extremely grey. And then there are these tiny little flowers who aren't showy. They almost, with their droopy heads, look slightly embarrassed to be out. It's like they're the flower equivalent of the first person to arrive at a party. Vaguely embarrassed, thinking that they've arrived too soon. A little bit awkward. So they've got their little bowed heads and they're not showy colours. The bright colours are coming along later. But they're very simple, very unassuming, and they just let everybody know that good things are coming if we just hang on, if we just hang on in there good things are coming. So I thought we could try stitching our little snowdrop. So that's my first layer for one petal. Not entirely happy with it, looks a bit scrappy, but that's just our first layer. So there we go. So I am going to, I hope that was clear enough. I feel like I gave 2 instructions and then rambled on, and now my needle's come unthreaded. Please bear with me. There we go. Let me try and bring it up to the camera a little bit. Can you see that okay? So it's a little bit scruffy looking, but it'll get neater, I promise. So this petal here is going to curve in a different way. So I'm going to maybe start at the tip here. I think it would probably be easier for you to see if I start at the tip. So we've got a longer stitch, a shorter stitch, and then I'm going to put a longer stitch in again. And then a shorter stitch. And a longer stitch. And these are kind of fanning out a little bit, not wildly, but just to create that shape at the tip of the petal. And then I'm going to take that stitch beyond again, and then we can slot our next layer of stitches in between. If you wanted to, you could do all the longer stitches and then go back and fill in with the shorter stitches, but the idea is to get an uneven line so that the stitches can interlock rather than sit next to each other. Otherwise you're going to find that you've got really sort of solid lines all the way along your piece of stitching. I'm using a much finer needle than I normally use as well, because I'm only stitching with a single strand, so we just need to make sure that we're not making our lives difficult for ourselves with some giant big-eyed needle that makes massive holes. I'm not a needle snob, I'll use whatever's handy normally, but for something like this that is meant to be quite delicate, I think we can treat ourselves to a dainty needle. Okay, so that one looks a lot scruffier. You're supposed to improve with practice, but apparently I get worse. So what I'm going to do is just look for gaps and put a stitch where there are gaps. And this is what I mean by different layers, because you can keep on building this up to neaten it and to fill it in and keep making it look better. So if you think it looks a mess, don't panic, because we are using, particularly if you don't normally use a single strand, in some ways using a single strand will give you a finer finish, but it will also not look like your stitching normally looks, because it will be a lot more gappy possibly. So if you don't like the way it looks, it's not finished yet. So you just keep going back and adding in some more stitches until you've got the smoothness that you were hoping to achieve. And sometimes making your stitches a little bit longer will help to smooth everything out a little bit. So sometimes if you make your stitches too short, it can look a little bit clunky. So sometimes a longer stitch here and there will pull together your layers and help it all look a lot smoother. So I think the key with all of this always is don't panic, Mr. Mannering. Just keep going. And you can also kind of burnish your threads a little bit with your needle. So once I find this really helpful with satin stitch, once you've stitched, I just feel like I need another one there. Once you've stitched, if you just rub your needle over the surface a little bit, you get a much smoother. It helps the stitches to just nestle into each other and smooth themselves out. So I'm going to put in the rest of my petals and then we'll actually do some shading, and I'll come back and show you that in a minute. Okay, so I have put in my petals and I've done a little bit of shading on this one just to make this centre bit recede a little bit. So what I want to do is show you how I've done that. So I'm going to do a little bit of shading on this. I've got a grey here, it's Anchor 397, so it's a very light grey, and I think the key to this is not doing too much variation between colours. So I'm going to do a similar technique to what I was doing before, but every now and again I'm going to just add in some little lines of grey just where shadow would be. So just at the meeting point of my petals there in the middle. And again I want to interleave them with the white threads that are already in place, and just sort of treat this almost like lines with a coloured pencil or brush strokes. Just scattering some grey stitches just to distinguish between the different parts of the petal. And I'm trying to keep my stitches heading in the direction of travel, so I want them all sort of arcing round to give a bit of roundness. So hopefully you can see I've got a bit of a line there, so I just want to break that up a little bit. Hopefully you can see a slight variation. We don't want too much because we don't want our flowers to look grey, we want them to be white. And again I can sort of burnish over the top there. Like that, just to open those up. And on this one I've also put a little bit of grey just at the top of the petals, just to help create a sense that there's a bit of roundness here. go, oh, keep doing it. I don't want to go all the way along because I want the join between this petal and the centre petal to remain white, but just want to put in a little bit of shading at the top there, and you can do the same over here. So just a tiny little bit of shading there. And this time I want to put on those sort of lines that indicate that this will open up, so the lines that kind of show that there are 3 petals forming this bud. So I'm going to kind of do a very elongated stem stitch here. So I've done one long stitch, I'm coming up a little way up that stitch and just making another stitch down towards the tip of that bud, and I'm going to do it again. So down, up to halfway, and I'm not going to go all the way down to the tip of the bud there. I think we can just leave it at that. So we've got our little markers on there. What I am going to do though is just darken up the shadow on these inner petals. So I'm just going to come along with this darker grey, just put in another couple of lines. I'm going to be very careful with this, very sparing, because I don't want my flower to go suddenly grey. So I'm not really outlining it, but I am just adding in the tiniest bit of shadow. There we go. Just want to do this little bit of light green here just before we put our stems and leaves in. So I'm just going to take a single strand of my light green and I'm going to just stitch into that white there. And this is much more like a satin stitch, and you could do it with 2 strands, but what I don't want is for this bit to look bulkier than anything else, so I'm just going to do it in a single strand. But if you've done all the rest in 2 strands, then you'll save yourself some time. If you use 2 strands, it's exactly the same technique, but you obviously will cover more ground more quickly. Oh, it's tangling up. So I don't want this line to be totally straight. It does kind of blend a little bit on a snowdrop. Just putting a couple more stitches in because I feel like that line has gone very hard all of a sudden, and we don't want harsh lines, so I'm just kind of blending that out ever so slightly. That's much better. There we go. So that's my little green tip on the inside of my snowdrop, and now we get back on safer ground. So I'm going to get my dark green. Let's see how this looks. And I've got 2 strands of my dark green, and we're going to make our stems with some stem stitch. You'll never guess. So this is back to our colour scheme. So I'm doing the stems first because I want these little ovals to sit over the top. So stem stitch, really easy. You come up at the beginning of your line, and I want to go 1 stitch length along. So I'm going to keep these really small because that's quite a tight curve. 1 stitch length along, and then you want to rock your needle back half a stitch length and bring it through. And when you pull through, you'll end up with a little T shape like that. So then I'm going to take my thread back over the top of my stitch and come 1 stitch length forward, and then take my needle back to the end of that first stitch and pull through. And again, stitch length along, back to the end of the previous stitch. And you always want your thread to be above your needle, so the thread's going up there and the new stitch is formed underneath that thread. And you can make these quite long normally, but because my snowdrop picture is so dainty, I don't want to make it too long. And if you didn't want to use stem stitch, you could do this in chain stitch as well. I just think with my silk shading that a stem stitch is going to look better. And I'm going to go back to working with a single strand to put in that little cap at the top of my snowdrop. So just going to start in the centre. I'm going to mostly try doing it in stem stitch because it's a separate unit and I don't really need to shade this particularly. I mean, you could add a bit of highlight if you want to, but I'm just going to do satin stitch. But again, I don't want it to look really heavy compared to the snowdrop itself. And I know this is not quite the right green, but I wanted as much of this as possible to go back to my colour scheme. So I'm using a darker green than I normally would use. Thought I'd see how it went, see how it looked. And I don't mind it. I think it's looking very dark on screen, but it is definitely a green rather than black or whatever. So I'm just going to work my way across the top of my snowdrop. I hope this is alright. This is very different kind of piece than we've done before. I'm just going to put in that edge just so that I can angle my stitches. Sometimes it's helpful to put in the two, oh crikey, sometimes it's helpful to put in the two edges, because if you are fanning your stitches like I am here, it can help you work out which direction to fan in at each stage. So obviously this shape is narrower at the top than it is at the bottom, so I'm going to need to make my stitches fan out a little bit, and it helps me to know where I'm working towards so that I can distribute my stitches nicely as I move across. So we did the simplest of stitches last week, and actually the stitches for this are very, very simple. I think you just have to take your time to blend if you want to blend. I mean, you don't have to. You can, as I say, you could fill with chain stitch or just satin stitch, but I quite like that. There we go. So I hope you're going to give silk shading a bit of a go. It's a very gentle thing to do, really, and just like with slow stitch, it does require you to work in a really steady way. Now while I'm down here, I can show you what I'm going to do with my leaves. So what I'm going to do here, you could do this in satin stitch. I'm going to do them in slightly chunkier stem stitch, and so I'm going to work up the, you could do split stitch as well. I'm not a fan of split stitch, I have to say. I think it looks really nice, but never when I do it, so I don't tend to do it. So I'm just working up my leaf shape edge in stem stitch. Does anyone else have this problem? The skin on my hands is so rough most of the time that I catch the thread and they become separate. So if that happens, just take your needle down to the base of the fabric and then just pull the needle along, and it will smooth out your threads so that they sit together nicely again. So I'm going all the way along my leaf shape like that, and then I'm going to come back down alongside it in the other direction. So it's just going to be lines of stem stitch worked right next to each other to fill up the shape of that leaf at the bottom. And I think that's enough. I don't think I want to fill it out completely. So I'm going to put in the rest of the stems, and then we'll come back and work out how we're going to add this to our piece of textile art. Okay, so if I bring it up close, you can see I've added in some little mid-green highlights. So I use my Anchor 258 for that, and I've just put some just on these top parts around the top of the stem and just on those leaves at the bottom. And so that is my finished snowdrop piece. So what I'm going to do now is decide how we're going to attach this to our background. So the first thing I want to do is take it out of the hoop. Quite a dainty little piece, really. If you notice, my jumper's changed, by the way. It's the next day. So yeah, so got a bit tired yesterday, so I decided to take a bit of break and come back fresh in the morning. So I'm just going to iron that on the back, and it's really helpful if you have something squishy underneath, because you don't want the iron to flatten your embroidery stitches. So you want something underneath, like a towel, or I've got obviously my wool here that's going to absorb the pressure of the iron and cushion those stitches. So there we go. Now you could do this in a range of ways. You could just cut around that if you wanted to, just want to cool it down so I can use my pen again. What I've done is cut an oval like this. I actually drew my sunflower design on it just to make sure it was going to fit. So I'm going to draw around my oval. I'll give you the measurements of this oval in a second. So I've just printed it out from my computer and cut around it on paper. So let me measure it. It is around about 10 centimetres by 7. So if you choose a circle on whatever word processing program you have and change the size of it to 10 by 7, you will get an oval. So I just want to change the angle of that ever so slightly so that it's more central. There we go. So I'm going to trim around this. Now if you were to do this rectangular, or I suppose it wouldn't be a square, would it, because it's longer than it is wide, but if you did it rectangular you could fray the edges, but I felt like I wanted an oval and I'm going to attach it in this corner here. Now I feel like it should be on a jaunty angle, but I don't like the fact that then the snowdrops would be at a jaunty angle, because they don't grow like that and my brain won't allow me to have them on a slope. So I'm just going to take away my heat erase pen from around the edge of that. And our theme is fragments. We haven't really done any fragments. So I've got my tin here of just threads that are left over from things, and I do have a few in here that match our colour scheme. So I've got a brown here, like a chocolatey brown, so we can use some thread fragments here, and I think I'm happy with the positioning of that. I'm just going to get my little applique pins. I'm just going to hold that down. And you can use whatever stitches you like, but I think I'm going to carry on with my running stitch. So I just want to come in from the edge a little bit, and I've got quite a lot of layers here. I did think about, maybe you can do this if you want to, cutting a hole in the wool and sliding this underneath, but I do quite like, I'm tempted to do it, but I do quite like that there's going to be this raw edge on the linen, and that we're going to have a little bit more sort of quilting of these layers. So if you didn't see last week, I'd already set up my backing piece, so this is a bit of an old sheet and a bit of quilt wadding from last year's project, and then I put the wool on top. So I'm having to do this in two motions because there's quite a lot of layers there. But I quite like that this is going to be kind of quilted, padded, and this running stitch is going to echo the running stitches over here. And as we continue to work on this piece, these edges will fray a little bit because the linen is such an open weave, or sort of a loose weave. It's not open, but it is loose, and so it is just going to get more and more distressed as we go along. Now, if you wanted to, if you've got some stamps and printing inks and whatever, or even a bit of watercolour, you could, or even tea or coffee, you could tea dye around the edges of this, make it look a little bit aged or whatever. That might be quite nice. I quite like that idea now. I'm worried that tea would make it a bit too yellow, but if you had like trying to think what colour would be best, like an umber, burnt umber watercolour paint, that might work nicely. So yeah, I've chosen a sunflower because it's our first sign of spring here in the UK, in Lincolnshire. So I wonder what flower you are going to stitch. Feel free to follow along with me and do snowdrops, but maybe you've got a different flower that signals that good things are on their way. Or you could stitch a flower that means something to you. So if there's a flower that has particularly special meaning for you, maybe that's the one to stitch. So this I've chosen because obviously it's a reflection of what's been happening in my life in the last few weeks and my need for a bit of hope. And maybe you are busy celebrating where you are, and so maybe you need a flower that reflects that sense of celebration. Maybe it's coming into autumn where you are in the world and there are flowers that signal a respite from the heat. I used to live in South Africa, and it was utterly beautiful, but so hot. For somebody that grew up in the UK, it was so hot, and there were moments where you just want the sunshine to stop. You want it to just end so you can have a little bit of respite. And the way we got respite was to climb a mountain, because we could go up into the clouds that were sitting at the top, and it would be a lot cooler and gentler, and it felt like we were having a break from the heat down below. So maybe there's a flower that signals that things are changing in the part of the world where you live. Let's use some of our leftover threads that feature in the snowdrop design. There's something about it that's troubling me as well, so I'm going to do something about that in a minute. I wonder if you can guess what it is that's bothering me about my snowdrops. So I'd love to know what signals you find in nature that you look out for. Are there any signs in the natural world where you live that signal something to you? Do you look out for blossom? Do you look out for mushrooms? Maybe for you it's the first frost, or the first snowfall, or the first rain. So I wonder what it is where you live. I'd love to hear in the comments. Right, quite like that. So the thing that's troubling me about my snowdrops is that they are floating. They're not grounded in anything. So let's get a bit of white here. They are snowdrops after all. So what I'm going to do is put some snow. We'll do a couple of French knots. So to do a French knot, brought my thread through from the back. I'm holding it towards me under tension, and I want to sit my needle on that thread, and then I'm going to wrap the thread over the needle a couple of times. Let's do 3, and I want to take my needle, got my finger on the wraps there, I'm going to take my needle down a couple of threads of the fabric away from where the thread came up, and then I want to hold my working thread under tension so the wraps sit on the fabric, and I'm going to keep hold of that working thread the whole time. I don't want to pull it too tight, but I'm going to keep hold of it until the last minute and then let it go. Let me show you that again. So I'm holding my thread towards me, setting my needle on the top, wrapping a couple of times, needle down, tension on that working thread so that the wraps go to the surface, and pull through. And I can put in different sized French knots. And what I want to do is create a sort of line underneath those snowdrops that is indicative of the ground that they're sitting on. And I think I'm very happy with that, and I can just help that fraying process along a little bit by just roughing it up a little bit. So I want to be careful not to damage my stitches, so I am just working around the very edge, but I'm just sort of scratching it with my nail. You could do this with your needle just to help that process along a little bit. Now you could add some more lines of running stitch if you want to. I think I'm going to stop there because I think I'm really happy with that. So we've only added a tiny little motif to our piece for this month, but what a motif. I'm really, really happy with that. Oh, that's brightened my day already. I think I've overdone it there. I'm just giving that a bit of a haircut. There we go. So, snowdrops of hope. I hope that you have enjoyed that little sort of very beginner friendly silk shading project. You can't go far wrong with a limited colour palette, and we've got our little snowdrop motif added to our February panel. So thanks so much for watching. I can't wait to see how you interpret the prompt this week, and if you want to share, please do so. You can use hashtag FSH Winging It 24 if you post on Instagram, but you can also post in our Facebook group, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. Have a great week stitching your hope flower or your little nature's signal panel, and can't wait to see what you come up with, and I will see you very soon for the next instalment in our February panel. Have a great week, and I'll see you soon. Bye.